Accidents happen, but some are much more horrific than others. Welcome to the home of the weird, strange, morbid, and creepy. I am your host, The Wizard. Today, I'll be sharing with you 3 stories of freak accidents that progressively get more terrifying. If you're new here, make sure you join the Wizard world by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Now, let's get into it. Our first story is that of Mr. Matthew Lowe of Birdwell, England, and his horrific run-in with a conveyor belt. Matthew worked as a plate welder at a company called Compass Engineering in 2008, not far from his home. On this day, Matthew was working on a computer-controlled conveyor belt that took metal from outside of the factory inside. As he began to walk away from the machine, it grabbed his overalls and began to pull him in. And he said he knew what was going to happen, so he just relaxed and hoped for the best. Now this photo supposedly shows right where Matthew got sucked through. Now he said that his head went to one side of the machine while his body was pulled through this 5-inch gap, which has been compared to the size of a CD case. He was pulled through this gap, his body was crushed, his clothes were completely shredded, but he was alive and he was conscious, which plays a big factor in his story as he was alone in that section of the factory, and workers heard his screams of agony. Once he arrives at the hospital and gets looked at by doctors, they discover his pelvis is shattered, his back is broken in 2 places, his stomach and bowel were ruptured, and both hips and several ribs were fractured. After a month in the hospital and 6 different operations to pin his body back together, he actually returned to work at Compass 18 months later. Now, I actually worked as a machinist for over a decade, and I've seen what those machines can do, and Matthew here got extremely lucky. Our next story is that of 30-year-old Shannon Malloy in her January 25th car accident. During the crash, her head was thrown up against the dashboard, separating her spine from her skull. They call it internal decapitation. Only about 30% of people who suffer internal decapitation actually survive. Those who do survive typically suffer from a life of extreme disability. She suffered from a fractured skull, bleeding in her brain, a swollen brainstem, a GI tube in her stomach, and nerve damage in her eyes. 5 screws were drilled into her neck, and another 4 were drilled into her head to keep it stabilized. She was then fitted with a halo and a circular metal bar to add extra stability. Many doctors were calling her situation an absolute miracle, as not many people survived this. I was able to track down a January 2015 update where she said she's been doing better but still has a long road ahead. I personally have never been in like a serious car accident. Have you? Let me know down in the comments. For our final story, we will be going to the Philippines, and unfortunately, this one doesn't have as happy of an ending. 18-year-old Jomar Junco worked at a sausage factory in Iloilo City. He was still relatively new to the job. He had only been working there for about 2 weeks and was operating a meat mixing machine around 7:30 a.m., a machine he wasn't actually supposed to be using. In a statement, the owner of the factory said his job was simply to package the finished products. When the experienced operator of the machine, Carl David Carlos, stepped away for a moment, Jomar took it upon himself to run the machine alone. When Carl returned, he was in absolute shock when he saw only his co-worker's legs sticking out of the machine. He rushed over and hit the emergency stop button, but it was too late. He was pulled head first into the machine and became stuck. Some articles claim that he was chopped to bits by the meat mixing blades, but that is not true. He actually suffocated.